And the pick six to seal it. And one more play for the Georgia defense. Georgia on the mountaintop.
But to be the man, you gotta beat the man. And I'm saying, woo!
You are listening to The Review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of The Review. It's the Online Sports Guys College Football Podcast, where we talk about the great, big, wide, wonderful world of college football, featuring us, the Online Sports Guys. This week, OSG Nelson, Brother Marty, me, OSG Phil. Brother Wilkie will join us for Wilkie's World a little bit later in the show. J-Dub is on assignment, shall we say.
Yes, he's on assignment.
But hopefully he'll be back with us next month when we have a new episode. And in case you're wondering why we haven't been here the last couple of weeks, it's because as the new year started, we're going to a monthly format since the season's kind of over.
Season's over, that's why.
Yeah, and quite a season it was. Want to just go ahead and get this on the record. The last time we joined everybody on the show, we picked the winner of the national championship game. And if memory serves, I think only one of us got the game picked correctly.
Wasn't me.
I wonder who that was. Oh, that was me.
There you go.
Taking the Georgia Bulldogs to win the game. Georgia did win the game. I guess to start things off before we talk about how the season went and your thoughts on the 2021 season, what y'all think about the game? Surprised at the outcome?
Downfield, underthrown and intercepted. Keely Ringo has an escort down the sidelines.
That first half, my wife had to wake me up after halftime. She's like, "You're gonna mess up the podcast. You don't wake up." I'm like, "Field goals, jeez." As much as I used to love trestle ball, that was very trestle-ish. Defense, kick, field goal, defense.
Couple of
That was
odd
a rough
plays
first
in
half.
defense.
That second half was like a completely different game. I mean, that was ridiculous.
Georgia's defense was as advertised. It made it look like that SEC championship game was a little bit more of a fluke or a bad game plan, whichever you want to call it. But, man, they came ready to play.
And this is one of the things that we've always looked at with the University of Alabama and their halftime adjustments. One of the best staffs around in adjusting at halftime. And now, in the most high pressure of situations, we got to see that with the University of Georgia. And I give Dan Lanning a lot of credit for being a head coach for a Pac-10, 12, 14 school and sticking with it until the bitter end with whatever the result was going to be for the University of Georgia, coaching a team to a national championship, being a part of that. And then, he goes on his merry way out west. So I give them a lot of credit. And you look at somebody like Nakobe Dean, and you look at him, you look at a player like that, he's already graduated in, I think, 2.5 years, mechanical engineering.
Oh, gosh, it might have been the smartest person on the field that day.
And it showed in both.
We're talking about Alabama, though, and the South in general.
True.
But I'm talking about in the stands, covering the game, you name it.
Mechanical
Like I said.
But, I mean, when you look at him and how he diagnoses things in 3 dimensions, and you saw it in the Michigan game, and you continue to see it in the national championship game, where it's almost like he's playing Vulcan chess and everybody else is playing checkers out there as he's diagnosing things on the field and making sure that everyone's in their proper place to make the calls. And I think that, as you got to see Jordan Davis and you got to see him take care of things firsthand up front, you got to see Jamari Salyer again for the second game in a row take things personally and make sure that Stetson Bennett was protected. And you got to see once again Stetson Bennett, an individual who we have covered since high school, and we've known what he's capable of doing as a quarterback. Once again, making sure that JT Daniels knew exactly what door the portal was.
For those not sure what John's talking about, he's talking about the mailman winning the MVP of the game. Shortly after the game, it was announced that JT Daniels, the backup quarterback, would be entering the transfer portal. Marty, were you as surprised as I was that Alabama just never got on track? Because Georgia really mixed up the way that they approached it on defense. They were coming from all corners.
Yeah, and my wife and I were also talking about, did in the SEC championship game, did they play the long game and not show much, knowing that win or lose, they're in the playoff?
Yeah, they might have.
Don't give them anything on tape. Because, you saw when the one bomb where he had a free play, you just saw him smiling. I was just so shocked at the difference between those two games. I mean, again, what were the ratings on it?
The TV ratings?
Yeah.
They weren't the worst. It wasn't the worst game. I want to say it was in the bottom 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of discussions I had with friends and coworkers were like, I don't want to watch this again. But that the first half was kind of going that way. The second half, it was just were they laying in wait that first half? Because it was completely different. Going back to what John was saying about coming out and adjusting at halftime, that was just surprising to me. And as an Ohio State fan, I'm sitting there going, God, if we could have had a competent defense, we could have smoked either one of these.
Yep.
And that kind of circles back to what I was hoping the theme of the show would be this week, looking back on the season. Is this something that we're probably going to be seeing for the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, we're already seeing it. It was Alabama and Clemson basically for the last four or 5 seasons. And now is it Alabama, Georgia, part 2, 3, 4, and 5 coming?
I think so. No, I think that's where we are. But I think that first and foremost, I think you have to look at this as the SEC and everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in whatever form it takes, I think that you're going to be looking at Alabama and Georgia. I think that you're going to look at the SEC West probably as one of the most competitive divisions continually in college football across the board. The survivor of the SEC West should be in that Final Four in the CFP. And then Georgia, coming out of a weaker SEC East, should be the one who's in control there. And you have the idea that 2 of the 4 teams will be coming from the Southeastern Conference to be in the CFP 4. And Marty, you're always looking at the big 10, 12, 14, the B1G and however many schools they're going to have, the B1G 38 or whatever. I think that you're looking at someone from the B1G and then a 4th traditionally. I think that that's how we're going to be for the next little while.
Now, Cincinnati really made a good hire with, like you've seen in the past week and a half, Ohio State just completely, everybody that was on the defensive side of the ball was let go except for the best line coach in the country, who's been that way since he's at Penn State. They basically traded the cornerback coach from Cincinnati for the defensive coordinator for Ohio State. Kerry Coombs is he's a top-notch human being. I don't know. Have you guys ever seen any video of that guy? If you see a guy with white hair on the sidelines, it's basically walking, talking Red Bull. You've seen people make interceptions, and this old man is stride for stride running down the sideline with them when they take it back for a pick 6. He is going over to Cincinnati to be their cornerbacks coach. He was out of his depth completely as he's a little hamstrung. They told him, okay, we want you to be our defensive coordinator, but you got to run this defense. He's going over to Cincinnati. His recruiting is top notch. Ohio State sent him to Michigan and said, hey, we want to start pulling some people from here. And he came back with running backs and defensive backs. He's a top notch recruiter. When he left to go coach for the Titans, you saw the drop off in defensive recruiting for them. So since he's got a ringer.
Did you actually just reference the school to the north of you by name?
He did.
The state to the north.
The state to the north. Sorry. Yeah. Did you still? Are you allowed to do that?
I can reference the state because that was where he cherry picked the guys that didn't want to go there.
Okay, just checking. I didn't know if it was something that was universal involving both state and school. I was just checking. I didn't want you to have.
It's only reference to school.
Okay.
Although it is fun to call the state of Michigan Satan's Mitt.
It does make you wonder if the Bearcats are going to be back sooner rather than later. I mean, they're losing a lot of offensive firepower and some defense, but that's a loaded team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's an attractive destination now that they proved that they can get there.
Mm-hmm. And they're eventually going to end up in the Big 12.
Yeah, because any recruit now, it's like, okay, we're here for the one more year. You know, they're going to end up getting into Big 12 early.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's a huge advantage when it comes to recruiting for them. But is the money that's thrown around with the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world, and even to an extent the Ohio States, is that the difference right now in college football? Is that what's making us see the same game basically over and over again with maybe one or two differences in teams?
Here's what I want to see is like A&M got organized early with spending money. You can see that with the recruits, but you got to see what is the coaching going to pan it out, and are they putting some time into their are they looking at the chemistry of the guys? Because like you saw with Ohio State this year, they lost all those linebackers, and that's a direct result of Coombs being gone and Bill Davis being the coordinator recruiting guys and not going on character enough. And all the people, everybody, that kid you saw quit in the middle of a game.
Yeah.
That guy was one of the ones. The kid that ended up not traveling. I don't want to drag their names through the mud, but the kid you saw tweeting during the game also recruited by that guy that left.
Right. And then you see what happens at Georgia. They win a national championship. They've lost, I want to say 3 or 4 players have announced that they're going into the portal, but it's just that. It's not a mass exodus. And you don't see that kind of transition or those kind of players at those programs.
And at the same time, you're looking at a top 5 recruiting class, and you're going to have those natural, and you have it in one of two ways. You can call it either depth or you can call it a log jam. I think it's a log jam at quarterback, but in other positions for the University of Georgia, and we see this also at the University of Alabama, and the folks in Tuscaloosa will continue to say, we didn't have our top 2 receivers. We didn't have our top 2 corners that got lost in the game. And I get that. I understand that as a part of the dynamic, but because of the whole 5-star depth, a lot of folks would have sat there and said, hey, well, what about your next 5-star that should have been in there to close things down? I think that, Marty, you're right on. I think it's the money that you're investing, because remember, these are businesses now. These are just college football. It's not just college football. It's not just a sport. This is a business. And I think that with name, image, and likeness, I think that you will also see that being an element in all of this as well. All we have to do is look at Jackson State and see what Deion Sanders has been doing with NIL to see how the landscape can shift quickly. I think that you will still have your Fortune 500s. I still think that you'll have your blue chips, but in places where it can be strategic, like a Cincinnati, Marty, I think that you'll have folks that'll be a little different.
The Deion Sanders stuff just turns my stomach. Nobody remembers what he did to that high school here in Dallas.
Right.
That's true.
They had him on tape saying just all kinds of unsavory stuff. Like it was just a football factory, and then laptops were stolen. It was just all kinds of just craziness. And
Bishop Sycamore West.
He is it was Bishop Sycamore about 4 years before it actually happened. But
that's where the game's going.
But it was a complete free pass on that, and then Lord knows what he's doing over there. What he's telling those kids. He's a used car salesman.
Well, but I think a lot of it has to do with name, image, and likeness. And I think until the rule, because right now I think NIL is the Wild West, and
it's different state to state.
Exactly, and
there's nothing to regulate it.
No, and until you end up with some kind of universal regulation, which might take a centralized agency that is supposed to be in power overseeing all of athletics when it comes to collegiate endeavors, but that's just me. Until you end up with that kind of an entity that wants to enforce what we're seeing with name, image, and likeness, until you end up with 50 uniformed notions, and then you end up with something because of the European talent that's being recruited and the Polynesian talent that's being recruited from East and West into the collegiate game. Because Jackson State recruited a German-born offensive lineman that I believe was in school in California and brought him in. So you're seeing all of these different things coming together now. Until you have uniform rules when it comes to name, image, and likeness, Deion Sanders will be ahead of the curve in bringing in college talent. And Travis Hunter, the number one recruit in the country, on National Signing Day back on December 15th, was the shining example of right now what NIL is.
Are we at the dawning of a new era with all this?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we are. I mean, you're adding, Marty, the financials now into this. You're not. What's the saying from the song? I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. I mean, that's where we are at. And that's
true.
And you know, I mean, let's just be honest. Alabama's been paying people for years, but you know, I want to see what A&M does. Like, their coaching isn't to the level of all these other teams.
But they're more than happy to pay the quitter $90 million to hang around, plus a contract extension. If they've got that kind of money to burn, they may as well just do it right there at the 50 at Kyle Field, right there at the logo.
But is it going to be like the chemistry problem? I just see chemistry problems there because leadership's weak, and whenever you have weak leadership, people start to fragmentalize, and you start getting those, you know, all of a sudden you have 25 teams that are all in the locker room, all picking their own thing. You know, this is going to affect what I'm getting from this car dealership. And now you're starting to hear about, okay, your NIL deal is contingent on.
Mm-hmm.
And
how
just
much
crazy.
When you play,
Ohio State just started the Schottenstein family that owned Value City department stores and furniture stores. They just started a NIL collective that's being an LLC, and that's getting rolling with Cardale Jones as a figurehead with it.
Well, didn't Ohio State have the quarterback that didn't play his senior year in high school, had a big NIL deal? He was supposed to head to Ohio State. And
he went to Ohio State.
Yeah.
He got out of he from what I understood, he got out of the state of Texas because of what the laws are here.
Yeah.
Went there for a year and then went back to Texas after he had his thing. He had a kombucha tea deal.
Quinn Evers, I think, right?
Yeah,
Quinn Evers. And then he went to he had a car dealership deal, and they actually made commercials about him leaving, like that they were reselling his car. They were kind of comical. But like, you know, that was like the whole thing. It's like he had all these Ohio State endorsements, and then all of a sudden, you know, what happens to that? Does he have to pay it back? You know, what's going on with those companies and the endorsements?
And what happens when you start to get taxed on those things?
And that's the other thing is next year, you know, come April, or this year, come April, do these kids know that they have to have that money set aside because they're a 1099?
Yeah, or do they take the all the accounting students and tell them learn how to do taxes by doing taxes for these kids?
Yeah, because that car might be free, but you're going to have to pay the taxes on it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you got so what's a truck cost? Plain. And then like every truck I've seen a player get, doesn't matter what state, what team, it's always tires up to my chin, chromed out everywhere. So they're going to be in a world hurt. They got no cash, they got a car, but you know, the tax bill on that car is substantial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in some cases they're just being paid to put on billboards, because if you ride around Metro Atlanta here, you can see University of Georgia players pretty much everywhere. Lawyer ads.
See, I'm just wondering when that's going to bottom out, because at a certain point you're just pissing money away as a company. You know, you're throwing money at a player, but your return on it's getting minimal.
Unless you're treating it as a write-off, and part of investment capital is used in that direction, where it's like, okay, that's a write-off because we're helping a collegiate athlete in some manner, way, shape, or form.
Yeah, you can make the same argument about a company that puts their banners all over a NASCAR or a lower level racing car. does anybody see it, or does anybody actually buy the product just because they see it riding around in a circle for 3 hours?
Yeah, Quinn Ewers throws an interception during Texas' first game, and then all of a sudden people start throwing the tea out the window.
Oh, or throw the tea back.
They're gonna have an Austin tea party.
Yes,
when he starts having a meltdown down there.
Very nice. Very nice.
I'm gonna have to trademark that, because if that ends up happening,
you're gonna have to jump on right after the show is over, sir.
Awesome. Let me hit LegalZoom before we post this one.
Yes.
It's just mind-boggling to me the can of worms that this all opens, and we even saw how it's impacted the season this past year, with certain players being able to beef up and some players getting name, image, and likeness stuff, and they didn't even play. They never saw the light of the day.
Yeah.
Just they were on the bench. But then the flip side is you have teams that had, like Mario was talking about, blanket deals for like the offensive line to talk about whatever product.
University of Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a scholarship lineman, you're guaranteed 50.
It's fascinating to me to see that, and then to have a season going back a little bit to the way the season played itself out, to have a season where it was always pretty much clear cut. Georgia was number one, by the week 2?
Yeah, and then that way until they lost in the SEC championship game.
Excuse me. And Alabama, same thing. They never really faltered. The only question is who's going to be behind them.
Yeah, because remember, when you're looking at the CFP, it is, and bowl season, they are television programs.
Mm-hmm.
They're not college football games in the purest sense. They are television programs, and the networks attached to them and the airing of these games are looking to fill 3.5-hour blocks of television programming, plus all the ancillary stuff in front and behind. So you're looking how to fill those blocks. And then the question comes, as we have learned from Vincent K. McMahon Jr., what's best for business?
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
It's Wilkie's World. Wilkie's World.
Thanks, guys. Some thoughts about the 2021 college football season. The SEC is still the most dominant conference in college football, especially on the Power 5 level, and they're starting to distance themselves from the other leagues. And just for example, take a look at the college football playoff semifinal. Alabama played Cincinnati, the Cinderella team from the American, and dominated on both lines, on the offensive line and the defensive line, and dominated Cincinnati. And then Georgia played the Big Ten champion Michigan and dominated the Wolverines in the other semifinal. So you got an all-SEC championship game for the second time in 4 years, and this time Georgia prevailed in another great game. Very happy for Stetson Bennett. He becomes a trivia question now and doesn't have to worry about buying a meal in Athens anymore. But this Georgia team was destined, it seemed like, to win a national championship. This team was built for that. And there were some struggles during the year, but Kirby Smart and his troops got it done, and they partied like in 1980 here at the HQ in Georgia. The league I'm kind of worried about right now is the ACC. Clemson obviously had a setback this year. And the league just didn't really matter. It didn't really register this year on the college football map. Sure, Wake Forest was a great story, undefeated late into the season, but the leagues just don't have the cachet to get the national recognition. And I'm kind of worried that all the gains that the league made 10 years ago has really had some setbacks. Obviously, Clemson dominated, and rightly so. They were the best program. But now that things have changed, some transitions, and they're recognizing now at Clemson that not only you need a franchise quarterback, and they were lucky enough to have 2 in a row in Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, but now both coordinators have moved on to head coaching jobs. So this is definitely a transition year or era now for Clemson. How they recover, we'll find out. But the league itself has had some setbacks. Now, I'm encouraged that Mario Cristobal is now at Miami. But then again, how many times have we heard about Miami making the right hire? And now they're going to try to get back to where they were in the 80s. I think Mario Cristobal is very capable of doing that. They've got one of their own again. He had some success at Oregon. He comes from the Nick Saban coaching tree, so there's a lot of positives there. But I think it's going to be a tough couple of years. Let's see what kind of recruiting classes come back to Miami, and that could be the bright light in that league. But I'm kind of worried about the ACC right now, whether they are on a really serious downward trend in football and whether that league can recover to where they were about 10 years ago. And finally, name, license, and image, and transfer portal. Better get used to that. And unless it's regulated, I don't know what we're going to see in the next few years in college football. I think the SEC is going to get stronger because they have the alumni base and the booster base to be able to offer these opportunities. And it's just going to get stronger when Oklahoma and Texas join the fold in a few years. So are the top players, high school players in the country, going to the highest bidder? Of course they are. And I think that's going to put the SEC in a great position to get stronger. And therefore, I worry about the other leagues. I think the Big Ten probably has the same cachet with their booster and alumni base. It's just whether they are willing to join that arms race and start writing checks, large checks to unproven high school talent, no matter how many stars are next to their name. It's a Wild West. Unless it's regulated, and I don't see right now who has the chops to regulate it. The NCAA doesn't. So some kind of bureaucracy is going to have to be formed, whether it's a commissioner of college football or what have you. Unless something like that happens, I think we're going to continue to see players just dropping into the transfer portal when opportunity doesn't come, and great players going to the highest bidder, even after a couple of years at a university, moving on to a different university because there's a better financial opportunity. I think we're going to have to get used to that. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be more like professional sports, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. You know, do I need to start watching FCS games or Division II? Because I don't think the big money is going to penetrate those leagues or that level of college football. But, you know, for those of us who remember what the game was like in the 70s and the 80s, do we need to start going there and watching college football? You know, I'm still going to watch the great leagues at the major college level. I'm still going to watch that. But I just hope it doesn't become too professional and that somehow it's regulated and teams can be teams, cohesive units for a short period of time rather than just year in and year out. I think we're in for a lot of change in college football.
Thanks, Wilkie.
And what's best for business this year was having two SEC teams in a rematch where the overnights came out to about a 21 rating, and they were up 20% from year to year for a championship game. So what's best for business? You have the folks who are invested and engaged in those two teams or those four teams, and then hating the four teams or the two teams and wanting to see the train wreck of one of them possibly losing or both of them losing and the field opening up and just having two teams disappear.
Grudge watching them.
Yeah, you have grudge watching and you have those who are invested. So that's why the ratings went up 20% from year to year.
But does it speak to the depth of the other teams that you had in Ohio State, to use Marty as an example, a team that everybody thought as the season started winding down was one of the stronger teams on the field, but had some serious defensive issues. And then Michigan jumps up out of nowhere and jumps in. But nobody seemed to be really interested or talking that much about Cincinnati, Michigan, Ohio State, Texas A&M, all the teams that finished in the top 10. But there was a clear dividing line between Georgia and Alabama and pretty much everybody else in a lump.
I mean, Marty, what size TV markets are we looking at here with everybody else? I mean, Cincinnati, I think, is a top 20.
No, Cincinnati's right around number 30.
Okay, so a top 30 in Cincinnati. Columbus, Ohio, about the same.
Columbus has grown exponentially.
Right. So
mid-20s.
Yeah. So, and then you're looking at Bryan College Station, which is in the 170s. And then everyone else. Once again, you're not getting all of these eyeballs unless it's coming from the B1G, or in Cincinnati's case, because they had to run the table and they had to prove over and over again every single week that they were worth it. You're trying to find the most eyeballs engaged. In Atlanta, you've got a top 5 market. And
the viewership numbers were astronomical here.
Oh God, I imagine.
Yeah, and then when you're looking at Alabama, once again, you're looking at Birmingham, but once again, you're taking the Southeastern Conference footprint, and there's a lot of markets in there that are going to be locked in on this product. And so, once again, what's best for business? The most eyeballs humanly possible. How do you get that? Being in the top media markets and having those markets engaged in your product. And so that to me, it's going to be the SEC.
But if you're going under that logic, Birmingham and Tuscaloosa is not that big of a market.
It's a top 35.
But it's the brand name.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, when you have these two schools from the number 1 conference, that you're going to have all of that either grudge watching, as Marty said, or the fan watching for those two schools. That entire footprint south of the Mason-Dixon line, the Southeastern Conference, that whole footprint right there is going to be thrown in and watching that product. So you got a lot of media markets that vary in size that are going to be engaged in that, whether they're grudge watching or actively engaged.
Marty, yeah, you might not have a top 10 market, but you're going to have all the other smaller ones jumping in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Marty, what does it say to somebody that isn't a fan of one of those teams or any of those teams that aren't in that location? What are you playing for?
To talk about it at the water cooler the next day. It just seems, you know what I mean, as far as like watching goes. The rest of them, I've had this discussion with a few people, talking about, because, they have the meetings down here talking about playoff expansion in Dallas, and they keep pushing it off. I'm not going to say what conference is filibustering that. Might be the one that had 2 teams in.
That had a team in the college football playoff this year.
SEC's also been dragging their feet a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But, that is the one way that you can get these bowl games back into relevance of, okay, we'll just make the playoff, I know this makes too much sense. You just make the playoffs the traditional matchup. So the Rose Bowl ends up being the Big Ten champ against the Pac-12 champ, or the Pac, whatever they're going to have left.
Yeah, 10, 12, 14, 16. Yeah.
Somewhere around here, I got a Pac-8 logo.
Yeah.
But, that's the only way to get the interest back up, is expanding it and putting it that way. It also, you get those stories like Cincinnati where a team like that can get in and go on a run.
Yep.
Because, they weren't that far off.
No, not at all. I mean, they put up a solid fight against Alabama in the semifinal game. They ended up losing, but they had nothing to hold their heads about. They clearly showed that they belonged at that level.
Right, but they also showed that the depth that a Southeastern Conference team has going up against a team from the ACC, you see the difference in not the level of talent, but the depth of the talent that's on the rosters. Because for Alabama or any SEC team, swapping out 5-star for 5-star for 5-star, the same is not the case for the Go 5 school that happens to be a part of the discussion.
Yeah, especially with the D-line depth, where you can, if you're ratcheting up pressure, you can keep guys fresh on there.
Yeah, and that's where you see a team. That's why you see a team like Georgia do what they did this year, because they started a guy named Jordan. They started Jordan Davis at nose tackle, who was an incredibly talented and gifted athlete, but he played 25 plays a game. And then you bring Jalen Carter off the bench, who's might actually, according to professional scouts, might actually be better than Davis, and he's your backup.
But if you can get 25 plays at 100% from some Jordan Davis, and 25 plays at 100% from the next guy, 25 plays from 100% for the next guy, and that sheer depth of talent that you have in the pool, you're going to, by the time you're getting third quarter and fourth, and we saw this when Cincinnati was playing Georgia, by the time you're third quarter, fourth quarter, you're wearing them down with all of this fresh, with fresh athletes chasing after guys who are out there the entire time and don't have the luxuries behind them that a team like Georgia or Alabama does when you're 100%.
Guys, what do you say we wrap up the first half of the show here? We talked about almost a half hour and some great conversation. Make sure, folks, if you're listening at home, that you follow us on social media. You can look us up at OSG Sports on both Facebook and Twitter. Our YouTube channel as well at OSG Sports. If you're watching the show, then you've obviously found us. And we have a phone app. Yes, that's right. You can go to the Google Play Store, the Apple Store, look up OSG Sports. We'll pop up, download the app because it's free, and John just absolutely loves to show it on the computer screen.
John loves free is what he loves.
Free?
You had a tweet pop up during that, by the way.
When we come back in the second half of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the other teams. Is there somebody that made a good showing this year that could be a potential stepping stone for them being a contender in 2022? That and some other news and notes when we return for the second half of the review. You are listening to the review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
We know that every driver is different, and a one-size policy does not fit all. That's why Country Financial offers a variety of discounts, so you get the coverage you need and the savings you deserve. From good driver to good student, multi-policy to multi-car, we've got a discount to suit every driver. Call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871 today to see what you could save. On Facebook at Jason Wright Agency, or by phone at 678-568-6871. Discounts vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Country Preferred Insurance Company, or Country Casualty Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, contact my friend Steve Apolinsky of Apolinsky & Associates. He's been representing individuals for over 30 years throughout Georgia and Alabama. Email him at steve@aa-legal.com or call him 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
The Online Sports Guys would love to hear from you. Go to our Twitter page at OSG Sports for a comment, rant, or just whatever's on your mind about college football. Now, back to The Review with the Online Sports Guys.
Show me the money.
Thanks for sticking around, everybody. You have made it to the second half of the show. In the first half, we talked a lot about what happened in the past season, how it was kind of a little bit of a launching pad of the era of name, image, and likeness and transfer portal and what it all could mean going forward. And going forward, we've got a 2022 season coming up staring us in the face. And we've already got the way too early preseason polls out. And a lot of them are saying we're going to see more of the same. Alabama looking as your potential number one team. Bryce Young returning. A good portion of that talent that was there this year coming back with a whole lot of 4 and 5 star recruits coming up behind it. And curiously enough, Marty, Ohio State looking, the consensus seems to be that's your number 2 team with the defending champ Georgia Bulldogs at your preseason number 3. Is there anybody out there that you guys think could jump up and mix things up with these 3, or is we talking about another runaway here?
I think it's more of the same.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame made a good coaching hire, and then they've filled it in with some good assistants, but Notre Dame's going to Notre Dame and crap their pants whenever it comes to to Showtime.
Yeah, they don't have the same depth as an SEC team or even an Ohio State.
No, and you're losing Kyle Hamilton, Jack Cohn. You're losing your quarterback and one of your big guns at safety. Yes, I know you're bringing in a lot of key additions, and I agree with Marty. I think that bringing in Marcus Freeman was the hire to make, and let Brian Kelly go on his merry way and dance on a lazy Susan and try to sit there and come up with an accent. That's going to
all while working
now
accent.
In 2 or 3 years, the turnover in their staff where they've added a few guys. They took James Laurinaitis. They haven't specified what his role is going to be, but he's a good defensive mind. So they'll bring him along. But that turnover, I think getting that the walking, talking poop emoji out of there is going to help their recruiting. Because, I mean, that guy comes into a parent's house. You don't want your kid going away to be with that guy.
No.
For
Ohio State, though, hang on just a sec, Phil. For Ohio State, you come back with C.J. Stroud and Trevion Henderson. So, I mean, the offensive weapons are there.
And announced this week was, I don't know if you know about DeJuan Jones, right tackle. He basically looks like Thanos with a helmet on. He's huge. He's about 6'8". He's a monster. He decided to come back for his senior year because I don't think he liked the taste he left in his mouth after the Michigan game, and he had something to prove. Which, Ohio State had the depth to replace one guy, but not both tackles. So that's kind of big for them.
You could argue that was the best offense in college football last year.
Oh yeah, and their whole problem, and they got rid of their problem with their Stud was a good line coach, but he kind of all the top recruits we have just happened to be from Ohio. He wasn't recruiting at that high of a level, and the guy they've replaced him with was getting similar results with 2- and 3-star guys.
Here's a team that I would list as my whole keep an eye on for next year. And I know they're coming out of the Pac-10, 12, 14, where nobody has even sniffed the college football playoff for the last 4 or 5 years. Right. And that's Utah.
Yeah. Marty knows a lot about Utah after the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
And
they were bringing it.
They finished strong. And if you look at a team, if they could run the table out west, you're talking about a team that could get the attention of some people out on this part of the world, out here in the East. And maybe they're not on the same level as an SEC team or even a Big Ten team, but they could be that little sneaky team that gets in there like Cincinnati and like, oh my God, where'd these guys come from?
I'm thinking Cincinnati's going to maintain. You saw the number 3 cornerback. He hasn't announced yet for 2022. And as soon as they change who their cornerback coach was, he's like, I'm with Coombs. So they're going to I think they're going to sneakily start building some depth there and start pulling more recruits.
You lose Des Ridder, you lose Jerome Ford, Alec Pierce, a lot of the frontline guys, but you bring in 2 quarterbacks and, losing star corners, losing your leading tackler and your top pass rusher. Redshirt freshman Evan Prater, Ohio's Mr. Football in 2019, will be the favorite to take over at quarterback. So still a contender for the ACC title. But then, where do you go from there? I know, Phil, I know that you were looking at Utah, and Utah scared the crap out of Ohio State in the Rose Bowl before, giving up the lead and losing in an absolute shootout. They finished 10-4. But if you look at the folks above them, in a stereotypic top 10, 2 of them play each other in a conference. And actually, 4 of them might end up playing each other in conference championships. Marty, you play the team to the north. And so that, to me, seems like an elimination game. And if you end up, figuring out one side or the other, that to me is an elimination game. So that knocks out one. Then if you have Alabama and Georgia as a part of the discussion, they would play in the SEC championship game. So that wouldn't necessarily be an elimination game. I think it would be a diminisher where you figure that they're both going to be in the top 4.
Kind of like it was this year.
Yeah. So I think that that's going to be the consistent element there. And then you're looking at Texas A&M. Texas A&M is going to have to get through Alabama. So that's an elimination game. So that would put Utah at top 5. So it would put them right there at that edge if you have them as at 6 or 7. So does Notre Dame lose one and that puts it at 6 and then maybe 4? I think that Notre Dame and Utah might be a part of that discussion for that 4th place when it comes to the CFP final.
Now, don't forget, Ohio State, Notre Dame is the season kickoff for both teams.
Ooh.
So that, I mean, right there, that can knock one of them out of contention.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm
And
not sure.
that game's going to have juice. There's 3 former coaches from Ohio State on that staff at Notre Dame. You got the head coach who basically said in his press conference that he wished he would have taken a scholarship offer at Notre Dame instead of Ohio State. He got a championship ring, by the way, for making the Ohio State decision. So there's going to be a whole lot of juice, and that's going to be in the horseshoe as well. That game's going to be loud. But right off the bat, you lose that one. Who else does Notre Dame have in their schedule that's ranked that high?
Their schedule's traditionally not that difficult.
I mean, other road games are like North Carolina, Syracuse, and USC. Yay.
Okay, USC might give them a bit of a run since they just took OU's offense with them.
But
True.
Other than that, you're looking at. I know.
I don't know if USC has any defense though.
Well, no, they
haven't had much of anything lately. Over the past few years, finishing right there in the middle, right around this 500 mark. And I think that project's going to be more than a 1-year rebuild for Lincoln Riley.
Mm-hmm.
Another question to both of you guys. One conference we haven't really mentioned here, the ACC.
Oh, well, there's a reason you don't mention them. They ain't that great.
No, Clemson had a down year. They couldn't get the ball, anything moving on offense. And then all of a sudden, Dabo Swinney finds himself with a brand new offensive coordinator, a brand new defensive coordinator, a whole bunch of movement around who's staying and who's going, and even more questions as to whether they can actually recover from this, because it wasn't that long ago where they were in that conversation of teams that were there every single year.
True.
Ohio State broke them.
Something broke them.
Well, and I think that the early magnifying glass is going to be on Wes Goodwin, the new DC, and it's going to be on Brandon Streeter, who's going to be calling plays. And what does DJ Uiagalelei do for trying to put 2021 in the rearview mirror and focusing on 2022? You're looking at Clemson, and I know a lot of folks might be looking at an NC State, and I'm sure that they're still mad about the whole Holiday Bowl fiasco, but their on-conference schedule is manageable. East Carolina, Charleston, Southern Texas Tech, and UConn. So that's 4 on the board right there. And, for a team that finished 9-3, 6-2 in the ACC, they might be the one to look at. I know that a lot of folks are looking at Clemson in this time of transition, and NC State with their just solid look right now. So, but they don't jump off the page to me. They really don't.
No, and the other ACC team that I have questions about, did Miami, by making a big splashy coaching move, are they trying to buy their way back into contention?
Yes. I don't see it, but yes.
Wait, wasn't there a team from up north that also broke them too?
They've been broken for a while.
They got broken. They got broken by the sweater vest.
Marty's
never recovered.
Marty's been holding these chips for a long time. Start dealing them out. He's the dude in Vegas at the casino who's the dealer, and he knows that he's got everybody stuck at 17 and they can't go anywhere. And Marty's sitting there going, "Bam, you're over. Bam, you're 16. You're staying. Bam, here's an 8." Marty's the blackjack dealer that's got a little energy behind him today.
It's just fascinating to me how quickly things rise and fall when it comes to college football conferences, and particularly the Power 5 conferences, Because you can arguably say the same thing about the Big 12, who's getting ready to lose Oklahoma and Texas, the two quote-unquote name programs there out west who are going to the SEC, and all of a sudden may find themselves regretting their decision, because it's sometimes in life it's better to be a big fish in a smaller pond than being that little fish in the big pond.
Are they going to be losing their money from having the Longhorn Network? Is that going to be absorbed into the SEC network?
That's the first question for me. That's
so if I'm a Big 12 member that stayed, all of a sudden, hey, if we get our act together, we can do what the Big 10 did and said, it doesn't matter what school you are, you're getting this much of the pie from our TV deal.
Yeah, when the SEC does the same thing.
Yeah, like you don't see people bolting from the Big 10 because people aren't being fair and spreading money around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all the other conferences do it that way. It's just a Big 12 thing where they let Texas do pretty much whatever they wanted to.
And now they got rid of that problem.
Yes, they did.
And then Texas is going to get smoked in the SEC.
It's just
they got smoked this year in the Big 12.
Welcome to the SEC West, Oklahoma and Texas. I mean, it's going to be great having Red River every year, but good luck going up against LSU and Alabama and the
Texas A&M and a rejuvenated Arkansas.
Good luck.
Welcome to
the Southwest Conference.
And A&M's already, A&M's already outspending him. I'm just waiting for that. I'm just going back to them spending all that money and not having strong leadership. That's going to implode.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
Because if you, for some reason, I'm circling back to Alabama and Georgia again, but if you look at Alabama and you look at Georgia, the leadership there, it changes. Alabama cycles through offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators almost every season.
Yeah, but the top of that food chain doesn't change.
Yep. The top of the food chain does not change, and he's very careful who he puts in those roles.
Mm-hmm.
The Nick Saban Coaching Rehabilitation Clinic the thing that they do that always has stood out to me, and the other schools I think are starting to try to pick up and emulate this, is they've got a whole roster of ex-coaches sitting there as consultants.
Uh-huh.
That they just...
Who never attend practice or offer insight to players during practice.
No, never. Never. Georgia did the same thing. Will Muschamp gets fired at South Carolina, lands a job with his best friend as a consultant.
Oh yeah.
All of a sudden, he's now the co-defensive coordinator for the Bulldogs this coming season because Lanning left.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Alabama. How many coaches have gone through the rehabilitation clinic there?
7,042.
Go there, coach for a season or two, be an assistant, do well, and all of a sudden your name pops up for every job imaginable. Heck, even Mike Locksley got a job out of that.
I was going to say, Lane Kiffin got washed clean there. It doesn't get much dirtier than that.
No, and although I will say he's proven to be one hell of a good offensive football coach.
Mm-hmm.
And taking some not that great talent and made him pretty good. He was successful at Florida Atlantic. He's already turned around Ole Miss. I don't know that Ole Miss will ever be on that same plateau with the Alabamas or even Texas A&Ms of the world, but they're certainly competitive. Gosh, who else? Steve Sarkisian, he didn't have quite that great of a year at Texas.
No.
The jury's kind of still out there.
Yep.
He didn't have a lot of clay to work with down there.
No. It's frightening to see just how bare that cupboard was.
Still is.
Yeah.
Well, they just bought a quarterback.
Yes, they did. They did just buy themselves a quarterback. It's not for lack of money.
Well, it was just funny when that kid announced he was in the portal and he just waited and waited, and you just heard all the stuff about like what each team was offering. Like down here, you were hearing a whole lot of who was offering what.
Yeah,
just insane.
It's funny because I've seen a couple instances where there are coaches now that are going out there on Twitter and making offers to players saying, come here, we can get you this deal and this deal for this amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening now out in the open.
Of course, because once again, it goes back to the topic we were talking about in the first block of the show. With name, image, and likeness, what you can do is you can steer an athlete to a wannabe sponsor, get that deal, bring them in under your umbrella, and they're there. It's the $100 handshake. It's the shoebox filled with whatever.
That's no longer hidden.
It's out in everything that we've said for
It's embroidered
decades.
backpack.
Yeah. I mean, the Doak Walker Scholarship at SMU with Ron Meyer with the $100 bill and the business card right there in the high school. Everything that we knew was going on and talked about, but didn't talk about publicly until it got completely out of hand, is now out in the open because there are no rules concerning NIL. The Wild West is out here. And the biggest gunslinger, the most successful gunslinger, may not necessarily be the same person, but it's how you devote the resources and bring in the talent that you think you need to win a championship.
Does that change the game? Could you see a scenario where we still have some guys bail out over the summer because they get a better deal?
Absolutely.
It's not even like the NFL where you have a contract binding you to play at a certain place. If you want to just up and leave in the middle of July and show up at somebody else's camp, you basically can't.
Yeah, there's basically no trade deadline.
Mm-mm.
No.
Because you had people entered during the year this year, not just before and after, but like during, like midway through the season. The like they've got to get a handle on it a little bit. I mean, before what they're doing was draconian. I remember there was you heard how many stories do you hear about a kid that like broke his leg one game in to his senior season and not get a medical hardship, but then you got Manziel the same year. What do you make it? It was $150,000 for going to a hotel room and signing jerseys.
Oh,
this
no.
is pre-NIL.
Oh, no. He didn't make that money, Marty. Come on now. You have to remember that was.
No, he made it. The SEC suspended him for an entire half of one game.
Sorry, I need to place my sarcasm a little deeper in my accent.
An entire half. The first half of one game.
Since he did not handle the money in that autograph signing in the hotel room, he was not. It physically did not change hands from the individual in charge of the autograph signing to Johnny Manziel by all accounts. It was given to another individual, but
that money he was throwing around the strip club after that.
I think
that was completely different money.
And for me, I'm thinking back to Georgia when AJ Green, in a season where Georgia was loaded with Knowshon Moreno, AJ Green, Matthew Stafford, and a whole host of first-round NFL draft picks, and they lost AJ Green for 4 games because he sold a game jersey for $300.
It was ridiculous.
Well, I mean, look at Ohio State lost. You know, the previous time that Michigan beat Ohio State was back in Tattoo Gate, where the guys all sold stuff that was theirs.
Yes.
Stuff they owned.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you or I could take any of the stuff hanging up behind us, the jerseys, stuff we've gotten from going places. They basically just sold that. And not only did they lose their senior years, but kids that weren't even in school at Ohio State could not come there because they lost scholarships on top of that. Even though the dollar amount was less than the midget from A&M.
But it makes me laugh when I read about people complaining, well, the NCAA needs to crack down on this. Mark Emmert needs to crack down on this. The NCAA can't do anything.
And when they do, it is so far after.
There's nothing they can do.
And
they have no
disorganized.
control.
Well, I mean, they run the transfer portal, so you just say it's open from here to here. That's not a hard play. Like the only good example I've seen of the transfer portal was this week. I saw a couple Ohio State walk-on players that were basically practice squad guys that would go up against the number one offense all the time. And 2 guys, one was a quarterback and one was a defensive back. put their game film. At practice, you shoot the all 22 from the genie lifts, and they put up. I went against. He wrote down his bio. He's like, I went against our number one offense, week in, week out. Here's our film. I'm flexible with defensive schemes because every week we would. We would show a different look of who we're playing against. So I'm very well versed in different defensive philosophies, and they had their film of, them guarding. And Ohio State had no slouches at receiver, but they showed it. This kid's running with him. That was the only good thing I've seen so far with this whole transfer.
Yeah, it has given some kids that weren't going to get playing time at the school that they chose an opportunity to take their services somewhere else. And ultimately, I think that's where it needs to go.
Yeah, North Texas needs to grab the quarterback that put his name out there.
Mm-hmm.
He's from the Dallas area, too.
But it doesn't need to serve a purpose where it's fortifying a team that's got just money to burn. Although I go back to what Marty said about coaching. If you've got a staff that doesn't regulate or gets a bunch of guys who don't fit in together, the puzzle pieces don't fit, it shows.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes an impact on your team. And it's what stops you from being a good team and keeping you from being a great team. Because as we all know from playing as in our younger years, that's the one thing that hasn't changed in sports. A good team usually will beat a bunch of fairly talented individuals who are on different pages.
You go watch a all-star basketball team, and when one of them is together and playing defense, they shut the other one down every time.
Yeah, and it matters. It really
You can't just have AAU football.
Guys, you ready to start wrapping things up here?
Sure.
We went on for a while, and for those of you who stuck this out, as we wind our way through the off season, we're going to pop up here about once a month. There's not enough really for us to talk about individually each week, although there are plenty of topics in the world of college football. Ideally, what we'd like to do, and please let us know what you think, if you like us doing these topical issues and kind of breaking them down and what they all mean. We'll continue to do that as opposed to just news of the day.
Yep.
But let us know. Drop us an email at osgsports@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, any of those places. We'd love the input, some topics that you think are important in college football and want to know a little bit more about. And guys, when we join everybody next month, we'll pick a topic. Maybe it's the changing coaching carousel news, why it happens, the security behind it, things like that, or another topic that kind of catches your attention. Maybe that's what we talk about next month in February when we join everybody again. But until then, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you. We love the fact that you're willing to stick it out and listen to us kind of ramble on a little bit, kind of like I'm doing right now. So for Brother Marty, for OSG Nelson, I am OSG Phil. We are the Online Sports Guys. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day, great week, great month, great year. We'll catch you again soon. Bye-bye.